I still remember the way the light fell through the blinds that morning, slashing golden lines across the polished oak table in my parents' kitchen. It was supposed to be a regular Saturday, coffee, bagels, maybe a bit of harmless bickering about who forgot to replace the milk, but instead, it turned into the day my life split into two parts, before and after. I sat there nervously stirring my coffee, even though I hadn't added anything to it. My dad sat across from me, arms folded, a blank look stretched across his face. My mom was packing, biting her thumbnail, a nervous habit she'd had since I was a kid. My older brother, Aaron, leaned back in his chair, smirking like he knew something I didn't, and maybe he did. "Listen," my dad said finally, in that heavy tone he used when he was pretending to be reasonable. "We've been talking, me, your mother, Aaron, the trustees, everyone." I blinked. Trustees, since when were trustees involved in a family breakfast? My gut tightened. I put my spoon down and tried to keep my voice level. About what? Dad's jaw clenched. He glanced at Mom, who immediately looked down at the floor. Aaron just kept smirking. "You," Dad said, "we've decided to cut you off from the family fund." At first, I actually laughed. I thought it was a joke, a twisted, stupid joke. I was 27, yes, but I had worked for everything. I had built up my little side business, sacrificed weekends, invested my own savings. Sure, the family fund had helped with a few things, but I never needed it. It was more about the principle, the acknowledgement that I was part of the family, part of the legacy. "Why?" I asked, voice catching more than I wanted it to. Mom finally spoke, but her voice was so soft I could barely hear her. "We're worried about the direction you're taking your business. It's risky. It doesn't align with the family's values." Values? That was rich coming from a family that had half their fortune tied up in industries I wouldn't even mention at polite dinner parties. I stared at them, feeling something boil up in my chest. "What direction?" I demanded. Aaron chuckled under his breath. "You're small time, you'll thank us later." That's when it hit me. This wasn't about values. This wasn't about protecting me from myself. This was about control, about power, about the fact that Aaron, golden boy, family favorite, didn't like that I had built something without needing him or Dad or any of their cronies. Dad pushed a folder across the table toward me. I didn't touch it. I didn't need to. I knew what was inside. Paperwork, signatures, legal garbage, making it all official, cutting me off not just financially but symbolically. "You have a choice," Dad said. "You can fold your little business now and come work with Aaron, learn the ropes properly. We'll reinstate your access to the fund after a few years once we're sure you're serious." I stared at the folder. My hands itched to tear it in half, but I forced myself to stay still, forced myself to let the anger bubble and build into something sharper, something useful. I looked up and met Dad's eyes. For the first time in my life, I didn't feel like a kid sitting across from an authority figure. I felt like an equal, no more than that. I felt like I had outgrown them. "No," I said. My voice was calm, steady, the way it gets right before a storm breaks. "I'm not folding anything. I'm going to take it public." The room went so quiet I could hear the clock ticking on the wall. 1 beat, 2, 3. Aaron laughed, a short, cruel bark. "You, take your little hobby public. You don't even have a board, you don't have investors, you don't have anything." I smiled, and it wasn't a nice smile. Not yet. I stood up, the chair scraping loudly against the floor. My coffee sat there untouched, growing cold. Mom said something, maybe my name, but I didn't hear it. I was already moving. I was already out the door. The sunlight hit me like a slap as I stepped outside. I stood there on the porch for a second, breathing hard, heart hammering against my ribs. Everything I had ever known had just collapsed behind me. The security blanket was gone. The net had been cut. And yet, for the first time in my life, I felt completely, utterly free. I didn't have investors, I didn't have a board, I didn't even have a solid plan. But I had fire, I had anger, I had something to prove. And by God, I was going to prove it. The drive back to my apartment felt like it took 3 times as long as usual. I barely remember it, to be honest. My hands shook on the steering wheel the entire way, not from fear exactly, but from the adrenaline still rocketing through my veins. Every mile that rolled by just hammered it deeper into me. I was really doing this. No backup, no safety net, just me. When I pulled into my parking space, I sat there for a minute, engine ticking, watching the world outside my windshield. People walked by with groceries. A kid zipped past on a scooter. It was all so normal, but I wasn't normal anymore, not by a long shot. I grabbed my phone out of the passenger seat and opened my notes app. I didn't know where to start, but I knew I needed to start somewhere. I typed the first thing that came into my head. Public offering plan, phase 1, build a real team. Simple, direct, terrifying. See, up until now, my business was really just me, a couple of freelancers I hired on Fiverr, and a dream. It had been enough while I was building websites for small businesses, doing branding projects, making a name for myself, but if I was going to take this thing public, if I was going to prove them wrong, I needed to level up. Fast. I spent the next few hours glued to my laptop, pounding caffeine and Googling everything I could: how to incorporate properly, how to attract investors, how to structure a company, stuff I should have known already but didn't because I had always assumed, stupidly, that there would be time, that when I was ready, the family would back me or at least help guide me. Now there was no cavalry coming, no secret fund waiting in the wings, just me and my willpower. By midnight, my kitchen table was covered in scribbled notes, printouts, 2 empty pizza boxes, and at least 5 empty Red Bull cans. My head was pounding, my eyes dry and gritty, but I didn't care. I had a plan, messy as it was. Step 1, hire someone smarter than me to help with the paperwork. Step 2, make the business look bigger and more polished than it really was. Perception mattered. Step 3, get my first investor, even a small one, a symbolic one, proof of concept. The next morning, before I could lose my nerve, I posted a job ad. It wasn't anything fancy, just a scrappy listing on LinkedIn and a few freelancer boards. Seeking business operations manager, hungry, scrappy, willing to grow with a startup. I didn't mention salary because, frankly, I didn't have one to offer yet. What I had was equity, tiny slivers of a dream I hadn't even fully built yet. I figured the right person would get it. Then I started calling everyone I knew. Old classmates, former clients, friends of friends. Half the time my voice cracked from how dry my throat was, but I kept pushing. I told them I was scaling up, that I had big plans, that we were on the edge of something huge. Was it a stretch? Definitely. Was it a lie? Not exactly. I believed it would be huge. That had to count for something, right? The first few days were brutal. Nobody answered my emails. My phone went silent. Every hour that ticked by, a little more doubt crept in. Maybe Aaron was right. Maybe I was just playing at this. But then, on the 4th day, my inbox pinged. Subject: interested in the operations manager role. Her name was Jessica, mid-30s, had worked at a mid-sized tech firm that went public 2 years earlier, knew her way around startups, had been laid off recently in a round of brutal cuts. We met at a dingy coffee shop downtown, the kind with chipped tables and burned espresso, but she didn't seem to care. She listened to me ramble for half an hour about my vision, the obstacles, the plan to go public someday, and then she said the 4 words that changed everything. I'm in for equity. That was it, no negotiation, no questions about salary or benefits or stability, just belief. I wanted to hug her, but I settled for shaking her hand like a normal human being. As I walked out of that coffee shop, the air felt crisper somehow, sharper. For the first time in days, the knot in my chest loosened a little. This wasn't just an idea anymore, it was real. I had a partner now, a co-conspirator, someone who believed in what I was building. And as small as it was, as fragile as it still felt, it was enough. Enough to take the next step. Enough to start building something they couldn't ignore. Something that one day would make them wish they had never bet against me. The thing about starting something from scratch, really from scratch, is that nobody warns you how much of it feels like making a plane while you're already in the air. Jessica and I didn't have offices. We didn't have a receptionist or a fancy conference room or glass walls overlooking the city skyline. We had her kitchen table, my rickety second-hand laptop, and a whiteboard she bought at Target for $12. And honestly, it felt like the start of an empire. Our first few days working together were a blur. We wrote up incorporation papers, burned through free trial versions of business software, and stitched together a website that made us look 10 times bigger than we actually were. Jessica was a machine, organized, efficient, no nonsense. Where I would get caught up dreaming big, she'd yank me back down to earth and say, "Cool idea. How are we executing that this month?" She asked the hard questions I hadn't thought about. What's our customer acquisition cost? What's our revenue model? What's our exit plan if things blow up? At first, I hated it. It made me feel stupid, exposed. But after the sting wore off, I realized this was what I had been missing. Someone who wasn't afraid to poke holes in my plans until the only thing left was something strong enough to hold water. We decided to focus first on building up a few flagship clients, big enough names that when we finally started pitching investors, we'd have some muscle to flex. Problem was, our name didn't exactly carry weight yet. I spent my mornings cold calling businesses, pitching them our services, branding, digital marketing, web strategy. Jessica spent her afternoons sending out polished proposal decks. Evenings, we regrouped over lukewarm takeout and dissected every near miss and maybe so. Most days it felt like shouting into the void, emails left unread, voicemails unanswered, people too busy or too skeptical to take a chance on two nobodies without a proper office. But every once in a while we got a nibble, and each nibble was enough to keep us going another day. One of the first real breaks came completely by accident. Jessica had a friend, an old college roommate, who worked at a mid-sized eco-friendly skincare brand that was struggling to get their online presence together. It wasn't a huge company, but it was respectable. If we could land them, we could put their logo on our client page and maybe look like we knew what we were doing. We poured everything into that pitch, redesigned their mock website overnight, built a sample marketing plan, even mocked up some fake social media posts to show them what their brand could look like if they partnered with us. When we showed up to the meeting, I wore my only real suit, the one from my college graduation, and Jessica had printed out our proposal in this gorgeous leather-bound folder. We didn't have money for expensive materials, but what we had was passion, preparation, the willingness to look them straight in the eye and say, "We believe in this, and you should too." I don't think I breathed the entire presentation. I just moved from slide to slide, voice steady, hands slightly shaking, watching for any flicker of emotion across their faces. When it was over, the CEO, a woman named Eliza, sharp and kind and terrifying all at once, closed the folder, leaned back in her chair and said, "You know what, screw it, let's give you a shot." That moment is frozen in my brain forever. The way Jessica squeezed my arm under the table, the way I bit my tongue to keep from grinning like an idiot, the way I knew that this was the start of something real. We left that building floating, practically sprinting to the car, whooping and laughing and punching the air like idiots. We celebrated with cheap champagne back at Jessica's apartment, sat on her floor drinking from mismatched mugs because neither of us owned proper wine glasses. We toasted to landing our first real client, to proving the doubters wrong, to building something that mattered. That night, as I crashed onto my couch, still half drunk and grinning, a thought hit me so hard I sat straight up. This wasn't just about revenge anymore. It wasn't even about proving my family wrong. It was about proving myself right. For the first time, maybe in my whole life, I didn't just want to succeed to spite them. I wanted to succeed because I believed in what I was building. It was messy, it was risky, it was stitched together with duct tape and late nights and stubborn hope. But it was mine. And no one, no father, no brother, no so-called family legacy, could take that away from me. Success is a funny thing. When it first starts, it's so fragile you don't even want to breathe too hard in case it disappears. But once it picks up steam, it's like trying to hold onto a rocket with your bare hands. After we landed our first big client, everything started moving faster. Suddenly, people who wouldn't even return my emails a month ago were asking for meetings. Jessica barely slept. She was drowning in client onboarding, contracts, chasing invoices. I barely slept either, but for different reasons. Fear, excitement, pressure. They all swirled together in my head every night, a storm I couldn't outrun. We hired 2 more people, freelancers at first, then part-timers. One was a web developer, the other a social media strategist. We couldn't afford fancy titles or fat paychecks, but we offered ownership, equity, the promise that if we made it, they'd make it too. Some days, it felt like we were unstoppable. Other days, cracks started to show. It wasn't anything big at first, small stuff, a missed deadline here, a client upset there, late nights turning into early mornings. I kept telling myself it was just growing pains. Every startup goes through rough patches, right? That's what all the entrepreneur podcasts said. Fail fast, they chirped, move fast and break things. But when it's your name on the line, your dream bleeding out one paper cut at a time, it doesn't feel like a cute Instagram quote. It feels like slow-motion disaster. One of our new hires, the web developer, quit out of nowhere, sent a 2-line email at 2:00 a.m. "Thanks for the opportunity, I've accepted another offer, good luck." Jessica found me at my desk that morning, head in my hands. "We'll replace him," she said firmly. "It's not the end of the world." I wanted to believe her, but it felt like a personal betrayal. I had spent hours explaining the vision to him. I had promised him a seat on the rocket ship. I thought he believed. Turns out, people believe until they get a better offer, and loyalty doesn't pay the rent. We scrambled to cover his workload. Jessica ended up learning basic coding just so we could meet a critical deadline. I pulled 16-hour days back to back, grinding my teeth until my jaw ached. And then, just when I thought we were clawing our way back to even footing, the worst blow yet came crashing down. Our biggest client, the skincare brand we were so proud of, emailed to say they were reevaluating their vendor partnerships. Corporate speak for, "You're out." I stared at the email for a long time, my hands numb, my vision blurred, but I wasn't crying. I was past that. It felt like my whole body had gone cold. Jessica walked in, saw my face, and didn't even have to ask. She just sat down across from me, silent. For a few minutes, neither of us said a word. The only sound was the low hum of the cheap desk fan rattling in the corner. Finally, I found my voice. It came out cracked and small. "They were our proof." Jessica shook her head slowly. "We're the proof." I wanted to believe her. God, I wanted to, but doubt had its claws deep in me now. I spent the next 2 days spiraling, second-guessing every decision, wondering if Aaron had been right all along, that I was just a small-time dreamer not cut out for the big leagues. I didn't show up at the office. I didn't answer Jessica's calls. I sat in my dark apartment, staring at the ceiling, replaying every choice that led me here. It wasn't just about the business anymore. It was about everything. My family. My pride. My future. I thought about calling my dad, about swallowing my pride and begging to be let back into the fold. The thought made me physically sick. No, I hadn't come this far to crawl back on my knees. If I was going to go down, I was going to go down swinging. On the third day, I showered, shaved, put on a clean shirt, and dragged myself back to the office, if you could even call Jessica's cramped living room that. When I walked in, she didn't scold me, didn't guilt-trip me. She just handed me a cup of coffee and a thick folder. "What's this?" I asked, my voice rusty. "New leads," she said simply. "Fresh ones, good ones, and I set up meetings." I stared at her. Why? She looked me dead in the eye. "Because we're not done yet." Something in my chest cracked open, a flood of shame, gratitude, determination. She believed in me even when I didn't. And if she could still believe, maybe, just maybe, I could find a way to believe again, too. I sat down, opened the folder, and got to work. Failure wasn't an option. Not anymore. Not after everything we had already fought for. And somewhere, deep down under the rubble, the fire started to burn again. Momentum is a strange thing. It doesn't come with trumpets or flashing signs. It sneaks in, quiet and cautious, testing to see if you're still paying attention. The first meeting Jessica set up after our crash and burn was with a guy named David Sharp. He ran a boutique investment firm, small, scrappy, just a few floors above a ramen restaurant in a part of town where nobody wore suits unless they were going to court. I didn't want to go. I was still bruised, still licking my wounds from the client we lost. But Jessica practically shoved me into the Uber. "Stop thinking about who left," she said. "Start thinking about who's next." It sounded corny, but sitting there in the back seat, watching the city smear past the windows, I realized she was right. If we were going to survive, really survive, we had to start thinking like survivors, like people who didn't wait around for validation. We walked into that grimy old office building with nothing but a pitch deck on my ancient laptop and a 2-minute rehearsed spiel that sounded better in my head than it did out loud. David was nothing like the investors you see in movies. No slick-back hair, no 3-piece suit. He wore jeans, a battered hoodie, and a Yankees cap. He didn't even sit behind a desk, just perched on the corner of it, sipping black coffee out of a chipped mug that said, "World's okayest boss." "You've got 5 minutes," he said, jerking his chin at us. I launched into the pitch, sweating, tripping over words, clicking through the slides too fast. My mouth was dry and my palms were soaked, but I kept going because there was no other choice. Jessica jumped in when I stumbled, her voice steady and sharp. She talked numbers, growth potential, market gaps. David didn't say anything, didn't even blink, just stared at us like he was trying to see underneath our skin. When we finished, there was this awful silence. I could hear the fluorescent lights buzzing above us. Finally, David set down his mug, crossed his arms, and said, "You're rough." My stomach dropped. Here it comes, I thought, the polite thanks but no thanks, the door slamming shut in our faces. But, he continued, a smirk tugging at the corner of his mouth, "You're hungry, and I like hungry." I almost fell out of my chair. He didn't offer us a full investment, not yet, but he offered something almost better, a small bridge loan, enough to keep the lights on for a few more months. and an introduction to 3 potential clients who might need scrappy little firms like ours. It wasn't the fairy tale ending, it wasn't some huge $1 million check, but it was oxygen. Enough to keep the dream alive. We left that meeting walking on air. Jessica kept punching my arm, laughing under her breath. "You almost blew it with that ooh on the 3rd slide, by the way." "Thanks for the vote of confidence," I said, grinning so hard my face hurt. "That's what I'm here for," she said, and for the first time in a long time I believed her. With David's small loan, we moved into a real office space. Not glamorous, just 2 rooms above a yoga studio that smelled permanently of sandalwood and patchouli, but it was ours. We scraped together used desks and second-hand monitors. Jessica made a sign for the front door with a label maker. And we got to work. The clients David introduced us to weren't easy. They were skeptical, used to bigger firms with fancier brochures and slicker sales pitches. But that's where we had an edge. We were hungry, we listened better, we worked harder, we treated every project like it was our make or break moment because honestly it was. Slowly deals started closing, revenue started trickling in, not enough to relax but enough to dream a little bigger. We even threw a tiny office warming party, just the team, a few friends, and a couple of pizzas balanced on the filing cabinets. I remember standing there that night, a warm beer in my hand, looking around at the cramped, messy, buzzing little space we had built. It wasn't a skyscraper. It wasn't some billion-dollar unicorn. But it was real. More real than anything the family fund could have handed me on a silver platter. And for the first time since that awful morning at the kitchen table, I realized something huge. They hadn't cut me off. They had set me free. Without them, I was building something stronger. Something that couldn't be taken away by a signature on a legal form. Something that belonged to me. And this was just the beginning. If there's one thing nobody tells you about chasing a dream, it's how success can sneak up on you in the quiet moments. Not with fireworks, not with a grand announcement. Sometimes it's just an email that changes your entire life. It was a Thursday, gray, drizzly, the kind of day that usually made the city feel tired and slow. Jessica and I were holed up in the office, juggling 3 projects at once, trying to figure out if we could afford a second intern. I was elbow-deep in a website redesign, half listening to a podcast droning on about venture capital trends when my laptop pinged. At first, I thought it was spam, some random LinkedIn message from someone wanting to connect and sell me something. I almost deleted it without reading. But something, maybe instinct, maybe dumb luck, made me open it. It was from an investment group I had vaguely heard of, Stonebridge Capital, real players, not the ramen shop kind, the big leagues. And they weren't just interested. They were offering to buy us out. I stared at the email for a full minute, trying to process the words. Jessica noticed the look on my face. "What?" she said, dropping her pen. "What happened?" I just shoved the laptop toward her, watched her eyes widen as she read. Stonebridge Capital wanted to acquire our little firm, merge us into one of their bigger portfolio companies. They were impressed with our client base, our growth trajectory, our unique brand positioning. It was all corporate speak, but the meaning was crystal clear. We had built something real enough that the big sharks noticed. And they were willing to pay. The number they offered wasn't life-changing, but it was a hell of a lot more than either of us had ever seen in one place before. Enough for me to pay off my debts, enough for Jessica to finally breathe, enough to say we made it. But underneath the excitement, there was something else. A knot in my stomach. A tiny voice whispering. "This isn't what you started for." We spent that whole night packing the office, arguing, running numbers on the whiteboard. It wasn't just a financial decision. It was emotional, existential. If we sold, we'd have security, money, validation. But we'd also be handing over our dream to someone else. We wouldn't be us anymore. We'd be a tiny cog inside somebody else's giant machine. I thought about the day my family cut me off. The rage, the heartbreak, the vow I made standing on that porch, feeling like the whole world had turned its back on me. I didn't fight my way back from nothing just to sell my soul for a few shiny zeros. But at the same time, what if we didn't get another offer like this? What if this was it? What if we gambled everything and lost? Jessica sat cross-legged on the floor, chewing the end of her pen, staring up at me. "So," she said finally, "what do we do?" I walked to the window, staring out at the city lights blurring against the rain. My reflection stared back at me, older, harder, sharper than the kid who once thought his family would catch him when he fell. "We didn't build this to sell it," I said quietly. "We built it because no one else believed in us." Jessica smiled a small, tired, proud smile. "Then we keep building," she said. "It wasn't an easy choice. It wasn't the safe choice. But it was our choice." We drafted the hardest email I've ever written, thanked Stonebridge Capital for their interest, told them respectfully that we weren't for sale, not yet. When I hit send, I felt like I had jumped off a cliff. But weirdly, I didn't feel scared. I felt free. We spent the next week doubling down. Called every client, reassured every partner, pitched new services, tightened our operations. And something amazing happened. The more we committed to our independence, the more opportunities started to appear. Bigger projects, better clients, invitations to conferences we used to crash just to hand out business cards. We weren't just surviving anymore. We were thriving. And deep down, even through the exhaustion and the endless to-do lists, I knew. Saying no to that offer wasn't the end. It was the beginning of something so much bigger than either of us had dared to imagine. The world wasn't going to hand us anything. But we were finally ready to take it. It's funny how life has a way of bringing you back to the places you thought you left behind. A year and a half after that kitchen table ambush, the morning my family cut me loose, I found myself standing in front of a different table, in a different room, telling a very different story. Jessica and I were hosting our first full team meeting in our new office. Not the patchouli-scented upstairs apartment. Not a kitchen table. A real office downtown with floor-to-ceiling windows, branded pens, a reception desk with our logo in sleek backlit letters. I looked around the room and saw 23 people sitting there, designers, developers, account managers, marketers. Every single one of them had bet on us. Every single one had taken a leap because they believed in what we were building. And somehow, despite everything, we had built it. We weren't the scrappy underdogs anymore. We were a real company, profitable, respected, growing faster than we could sometimes keep up with. I gave a short speech that morning, something about how proud I was, how far we'd come, but honestly my throat got tight halfway through and Jessica had to jump in and finish. Not that she let me live that down either. Later that afternoon, as the buzz of the meeting faded and people drifted back to work, I sat by the window, nursing a coffee, letting it all sink in. And that's when the email came. From my father. It wasn't long, maybe 8 lines total, formal, measured. He congratulated me on the company's success. Said he had been following our progress with great interest. Mentioned that the family was considering new ventures and that there could be opportunities to collaborate should I be open to it. I stared at the screen, feeling a complicated mess of emotions knot up in my chest. Pride, bitterness, sadness, vindication. A year and a half ago, they had looked me in the eye and decided I wasn't worth the risk. Now they were peeking over the fence, seeing what they missed out on. Part of me wanted to respond with a single word. No. Part of me wanted to unleash every ounce of resentment I still carried like a scar just under the surface. Tell them how much it hurt. Tell them how many nights I doubted myself because of them. Tell them how I built this without them, because of them, in spite of them. But instead, I closed my laptop. I sat back in my chair. And I smiled. Because the truth was, I didn't need their approval anymore. Didn't need their fund. Didn't need their name. I had built something real. Something no one could take away. And that was worth more than any collaboration, any check, any grudging acknowledgement could ever be. A few weeks later, I ran into Aaron at a conference, by accident, or maybe by fate. He looked the same, sharp suit, perfect hair, the same smug smirk barely tucked behind a professional handshake. But this time, the power dynamic had shifted. This time, I was the one getting stopped in the hallway by people wanting to pick my brain. I was the one fielding offers. I was the one they whispered about, not as the kid from the family fund, but as the founder who had made it without them. We shook hands, made small talk. He even joked lightly, like it didn't matter, about how maybe they shouldn't have underestimated me. I laughed, said something polite, then excused myself to join my team, the real family I had built from the ground up. As we left the conference later that evening, walking together into the warm city night, Jessica bumped my shoulder with hers. "Look at you," she teased, "Mr. Big Time." I laughed. Not the forced kind, not the bitter kind, but a real one. A laugh full of freedom, full of pride, full of peace. We had done it. Not for revenge. Not for validation. Not even for the money. We had done it for ourselves. For the dream. For the belief that sometimes when the world cuts you loose, it's not to punish you. It's to see if you can fly without it. And we had. Oh, we had. Better. Stronger. Higher than they ever imagined. And the best part, we were just getting started.